Cody, awesome to have you on the show, man. I'm really excited for our conversation today. And I think we had a lot of similarities in how we came into the field. You mentioned you didn't have a strength coach, I think, till, was it like your senior year of college, or you yourself taught a lot of that?
Never had a strength coach ever, Joel. I got introduced to lifting weights by my dad when I was 12. Here's a great story. I don't think I've ever told this on a podcast, which is kind of funny. I'll never forget, we're going into getting ready for 6th grade. And my dad took me to the weight room after I transferred schools because my buddy's dad was one of the assistant superintendents or whatever. And I transferred to this school for a lot of different reasons, but also to take sports a little more seriously. And we went to the varsity weight room, and I'll never forget, I was in the 6th grade. I think I was 12 years old. And they were just going, it's funny looking back on this now because it was so stupid, but they were asking me to power clean 95 pounds from the floor. I'm not a small kid, so it's not like it was I weighed more than 95 pounds. And it didn't really teach me. And the first time I did it, I just, did the whole pulled it off the floor, and I fell backwards, and the bar came this close from hitting my face, and I had to push it off my face. And I remember being walking out of there I'm never lifting again in my life. That was I was near death experience. I was scared to death. I was crying, 12 years old. And
those 25s, by the way, the big or the little?
No, the iron grip freaking iron plates, little old bitty ones. So I had to go way down there. I'm sure my back was all hunched over. I mean, and I remember that, and I just remember being oh my gosh. But my dad was no, we're going back after school to lift with Mr. David, 3 times a week. And I hated it so much, but trained, and then obviously played football, played 3 sports in high school, and I knew lifting weights was part of it. But like I said, you hit puberty, and then the insecurity piece, you start to lift. And then I go to college, and I really start to learn how to lift and loved lifting. Or had no strength coach in college, played D2 baseball, and I just had to be self-taught because our coach kind of just said hey, I better be seeing you working. Go in the student rec center and go to the weight room, and I just better see you working hard. Not even a program, just go work, which is kind of crazy, right? So, and I was just man, I knew I was really strong. By the time I was a senior in college, I was, squatting 500. I could clean 3 plates. And then went on to and then by the time I was out of college, ended up figuring out what a strength coach was through my college internship experience. Didn't even know it existed, and decided I wanted to chase that dream and become that. But then just started becoming obsessed with human performance over the last 10 years. It's funny, with my own lifting experience, Joel, that you talk about. I was huge on the weight room. I never did any speed work. I was a pitcher. So sprinting at that point I thought was stupid. I've learned a lot more since then about how the sprinting is a stimulus. But, I was just man, I'm going to be stronger than everybody. I was the strongest guy on the team. Even when I was done playing, I had a lot of bias from my own experience of lifting heavy. We have to get strong. And even when I was coaching, I was still trying to lift heavy. I ended up get where I could deadlift 600. And the thing is fast forward 7 years later, at 30 years old, I had a total hip replacement on my right hip.
Oh man. Yeah.
And people were what? And I'm yeah, man, I had hip dysplasia and had no idea. I found a way to compensate enough to throw pretty hard as a right-handed pitcher. I could throw 90 miles an hour, and destroyed my hip, lifted with nothing but compression and heavy loading. I did no stability work. I did no mobility work. I didn't do any single leg work. I didn't do any of that. So perfect storm. And my hip got so destroyed also with the birth defect of having hip dysplasia. I had no choice but to get that replaced because I couldn't walk. I had a kid, couldn't get on the floor, couldn't move, couldn't demo. I was coaching, and it was brutal, so so now my lifting experience is completely different. It's all about stability. It's about being able to move. It's being able to express my ways and have a quality of life. And I look at it as human life performance. Can I keep everything below my knee healthy enough so that I can play a little bit of pickup basketball with my family or, with my kids one day so I don't pop an Achilles, things like that. So, so going all the way back in that history, I did have a ton of bias, but even through that now, I've just happened to, be able to get in contact with some really, really good professionals and mentors and start looking at performance as a whole, human performance as a whole, and then start learning how to solve problems to make an athlete better and trying to consider every subsystem that goes into all that, including the inputs that happen in sport that affect the physiological side and trying to study that, and then also the psychological side and trying to do that at scale. Those are the fun thought experiments I have now. Like that's all I'm obsessed with. I can't ever stop thinking about it. So um that's where I'm at now. As far as what intrigues me and all. But I'm glad you said about your personal lifting experience and everything, because that had a huge impact on my life
Mm.
and had implied bias that
Yeah.
I actually had to like approach and face that. Because my early days on Twitter, like when Twitter was banging, like 2019 through COVID, my Twitter blew up and everybody was like, "Oh, that Cody guy, he loves to talk shit." Like I was like, "He's an asshole." Like that's literally like the common thing. And then they'd meet me in person. They're like, "You're not as big of a jerk as I thought you'd be." And I'm like, "Dang, that's the persona." But I would just speak my mind.
Yeah.
'Cause I was so passionate, I thought I knew answers, and I was right about probably 80% of it, but then also I look back and go, "Eh, I don't know." Like, hence the Instagram post, right? About, or the Twitter conversation with my friend who actually got to meet in person in Austin at the USR Speed Summit. That's where that post came from about those snapdowns.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I can argue both sides of those now. I think I'm just a little bit more mature of a coach and know a little bit more,
Yeah.
but boy, in that moment, I was hell bent.
Yeah, there is something, with all that, especially kind of that like the separation during COVID where it's just even more virtual than it typically is. And there's all the heuristics about how we are so much different behind a screen than we are in person. Like as soon as you get in person, like I feel it. Like I feel how things change very quickly. And so sometimes I almost feel like I wouldn't say different parts of our brain, but I know exactly what you're saying. And
Mhm.
I see that in myself without question. But I want to get into the snapdowns piece actually, because I love I wish I would have seen more of that exchange, with the snapdowns and not. I want to get into that. But yeah, I feel like we had a lot of similarities in the sense that I didn't have a strength coach until, I mean, in college, my track coach was my strength coach.
Right.
And he was a good coach. Like he had a lot of physical education inspired material. Looking back now, like 15 years later, I'm like, wow, he had a lot of Bush Exeter inspired stuff. That's cool. I
Yeah.
realized that was really awesome. But I remember very distinctly the first time he was showing the team how to do power cleans. He's like, it was just way too much high pull. The rhythm was. I was watching him, and I just remember kind of checking out a little bit, just because I had started lifting and self teaching since like 12 or 11, and a lot of it
Mhm.
was seeing my dad lifting weights in the basement. And just it's funny because I don't come from a strong family. Like I would have loved to. I mean, 600-pound deadlift would be like in my dream. I have long
Well,
arms, so that's helpful and a good grip. But I just remember my dad's like benching like 100 pounds in the basement with those old like concrete Kmart weights. And
yeah,
and honestly, at that point, I think I might have been 9 or 10 watching him. But if you're 9 or 10, your dad's Superman.
that's right.
And so I remember I was like, I want to do this. I think I benched like 40 pounds or something. I'm like, all right. And then a few years later, I think I eventually started going and lifting and just trying to read it was like this Kmart description of all the lifts you can do. And
Yeah.
the funny one looking back is like that's when the Jefferson squat was big. Like the kind of the bars between your legs. It's like a deadlift, but the bar is not. You're straddling the bar essentially. And funny enough, I've kind of had a return to those variations of lifting after 25 years. I remember looking at it back in the day. It's like the hack squat was in there with the bars. Like this looks stupid. I just want to do arm curls and bench press. What are all these weird lifts? And just reading through that. But where I'm trying to go is I think there's so much to look. Starting yourself first, like learning yourself first, making the mistakes first, getting hurt first. It's just because I think we do live in a day and age where everything is so highly structured, and I think it's good. Yeah, I don't think you want to let the high school, hey, freshman boys, here's some weights, go figure it out. That would not be a good idea.
Sure.
But I do think there is that personal journey that we lived through where we did have to figure it out, and every injury you get teaches you so many lessons that you would never learn otherwise.
Yeah.
Uh, so, yeah,
No, I'm with you. I mean, I think that there's too many young coaches now that think they read a textbook and follow 12 good coaches and have read all the articles on Simply Faster and all of a sudden, but they've never coached anybody and never stood in front of anybody or lifted themselves or have any personal experience on learning those things. Like that's going to get exposed really fast. Like it's almost like you're doing it backwards, but it's really hard in today's society with knowledge just being so there. I mean, I think that if young coaches would get some skin in the game, then learn the interpersonal side of actually coaching somebody face to face, but then also expediting their knowledge, they can become a much better coach a lot faster, especially if you fall into a place where you can be mentored and you find the right internship, but also combined with all of that knowledge. I mean, you can expedite that process really fast if somebody's really passionate. So like, I don't want to knock that. I don't want to say, oh, the coaches these days, they haven't earned it or whatever. I think that's complete trash, but you can get ahead of yourself and almost have to undo some things if you don't understand like the holistic of coach development. I know that's kind of off the side here of like what we're talking about, but I'm very passionate about that too. Is how do we get where we're here? Like you look at any really good coach, how did they get where they're at? What are the common denominators of every coach that anybody considers successful? What did they experience? Obviously they're knowledgeable, they've got wisdom, they've had very specific experiences and had a lot of learning lessons and experiences where though almost every good coach will tell you like, I made a ton of mistakes.
Yeah.
But you have to do that, and having freedom. And I'm actually in a place now where, I'm hiring coaches and I'm having to like step back and let these coaches figure it out. And I just want to step in and be like, you're not seeing what I'm seeing, but I'm like, they will. Give them a chance. Like you have to let them develop, or you're never going to be able to do this at scale. So, that's neither here nor there, but.
Yeah, I know you're a parent too. And I think it's just nice to be able to see these concepts. You see it with children, you see it with management, you see it. The more frames you can see it, I'm sure it's beneficial just because we're in an age of helicopter parenting where kids are going around and their parents are always five paces away from them, not allowing the kids to make mistakes, to learn from mistakes.
Right.
And I just think that, it's probably a little bit more of a global type thing. But I do think, how the question would be if you have a system with human performance and sport even as well. One of my muses, I just like to study at least a little bit the athletes who grew up without the sports coach, without the skills coach, like LeBron, right? It didn't have of course he's a beast, but like maybe a better example would be like, I like Pistol Pete Maravich, just grew up dribbling a ball literally to the movies, like everywhere you could possibly imagine, or like Diego Maradona that grew up in a third world country, poor, but like dribbled the ball literally everywhere. And I'm sure those athletes would have been very good if it's like, okay, you're going to go to this coach, you're going to learn this. They still would have been good, but the question would be, would they have the creative insight that they landed on without all that time? And
have you ever read the book The Goldmine Effect?
I have not.
That's a really good book. It's about it takes different silos around the country of places where these elite performers have developed. Think like, from Jamaican sprinters, or like Kenyan endurance runners, or, all of these different places of the world where it seems like the best in the world in these certain places. Like, what about that culture and those things? Because they don't necessarily have all the resources. Like, but what it picks out like different patterns of high performance and these places have created these gold mines, which is kind of like the same concept of what we're trying to create where we're at.
Yeah.
And trying to take away some of those things. It's a really interesting book. It's a really short read, really, really easy read. But I think it goes back to kind of like really intriguing of like why, so-and-so from the third world country, like became this. And then like, cause the easy answer is just to say they were gifted. They were just talented. It was God gifted, which is not untrue, but like nature versus nurture, like those are all really good thought experiments, that if you're in performance, if you're not having those thought experiments, and I don't really know how passionate or obsessed you are with this thing,
Athletic performance is built on a spectrum of training methods, from high velocity skills to power training to strength work. And on one end of that spectrum, on that strength end, you have the most targeted work in the form of machines. And this is part of the reason that so many top speed and strength coaches have their favorite machines to deliver that targeted stimulus. For decades, Hammer Strength has been a top provider of reliable, effective machines that are trusted by coaches and athletes worldwide. They fit seamlessly into that total performance program, delivering that targeted strength stimulus. When it comes to your machine-based strength training needs, think hammer strength. Weighted vests have been a staple in athletic performance for decades, but the next generation in wearable resistance is found in light micro loads placed on the limbs of the body. The leader in micro loading and wearable resistance is Exogen gear by Lila. Exogen is used by the top track and field and sports performance coaches in the world, and it provides a level of angular velocity training and potentiation that is second to none. If you want 20% off of Exogen gear by Lila, then head to lilateam.com, that's lilateam.com, and use the code JustFly20. That's JustFly20 for 20% off your order. Grab your Exogen gear today and see the difference in your training. Even within those, I guess the idea would be, I think Dan John mentioned this a while back. It might have been the first appearance he had on this show, but the idea of like deprivation. Like if you're in a system, like even if you have like the nice gym, like, all right, hey, we're going to go train in the dungeon for like, it's like you have like the Jekyll and Hyde version of what you have. You have the nice, then you have that like you Spartan. And I think similar to Goldmine, it was Daniel Coyle, I think, in the Talent Code. I had
great book. Yep.
I didn't read the big one. I read the short, lazy. I guess you got the lazy read. But one of the things that really stood out was like a lot of these talent dens are very Spartan, because a Spartan place, like a Rocky training in Siberia, it says you haven't made it. It says, and so it's like, well, that's a balance. How do you have that inspiring, beautiful place? That is so amazing, and then how do you contrast that with also that message says, hey, you haven't made it yet, or hey, go take some time to be creative, and what's the balance there? To me, those are the questions I ask. And I think for me, I think you might have mentioned it either before we started Push Record or after, but like, having a family and having kids. And I think one of the best things with having kids, outside of just having kids, I mean, kids are amazing. They're such a gift, but also like, for me, it's been those moments of just coming up with little games with my son. Like the other day, he's like, I'm bored. And I'm like, all right, well, he likes baseball. And I'm like, all right, well, let's play baseball golf. We just invented this game in the front yard where we put a hoop out and we would just throw the ball to ourselves, hit it. And whoever gets the closest to the hoop from, we'd say like 20 feet away, who got the closest to the hoop? Okay, go again. Like just kind of making up stuff. I don't know, I just think about that balance. Or the Simply Faster sent me a cool, like slanted, like one of those Polish boxes,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And a bunch of neighborhood kids were in the garage. I just took a post and I just put it at the bottom, like, all right, level 1, see who can do pass level 1 and do 10 hops in a row over this. And then level 2, I raised it up a little bit, and then level 3. And you just kind of like stuff like that. We're just making do,
Well, you're also gamifying training there, which is a whole nother concept, right? I mean, that's why I'm such a huge proponent of velocity-based training. Like you get start talking about the methods of, and that's kind of a segue there, but like,
sure.
That's everything. Like trying to incentivize an athlete to train hard the right way is everything. Like that's the whole game, guys. Like I can't fathom, like that is literally part of the job, is trying to figure out how to get the athlete to train at a level of effort and curiosity that keeps them engaged, so you can continue the lifespan of development. Because if you lose them, it's near impossible. Like I don't care how good your sets and reps are, like you've got to find ways to train with high integrity and results driven methods, but they has to be somewhat engaging, and then you've got the two extremes that both don't work really well. The ones that's extremely sciencey, and if you just follow the program but doesn't have any type of engagement, it's super boring, it's bland, you don't have a personality in it. Like the coaches that don't utilize music in their training, like, are you crazy? Like that, why are you leaving that off the table? And then you've got the other ones that are like, it feels like you're walking into a fun park, like it's really engaging, but the training sucks. And at the end of the day, you got to get results. So that's why, like, VBT, I think is a catalyst for all of that if you use it right.
Yeah, that was one of the big topics, and that's a great segue. Before I forget, because I really wanted to get to this piece here, and you mentioned it with the little like the Twitter run-in, but the snap.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
I want to get to that first, just because I do think that's just one of the things that, and maybe you or us going through so much ourselves before being shown this is the way. It's just, you see something like a snap down, especially for like a higher level athlete. And honestly, in my opinion, even a lower level athlete, it just seems like you're really trying to control movement and shove it in a box. But sorry, I don't want to get carried away with my opinion of it. Tell me a little bit about, that post, like snapdowns and college athletes doing snapdowns, and unpack a little bit of that discussion there.
Sure. So, golly, I think this was maybe a year or two ago, but I was brought back to light this conversation that we had on Twitter with a guy that I actually didn't know. But I saw a video of some college football athletes dropping off like an 18-inch box and like being really rigid and landing, and it's very militaristic and hold, and then go into a concentric only like jump and then land. And I was like, I basically just said, like, do you guys really think this is stimulating for a Division I level talent? Like that's incredible. Like what are we doing? And then like the guy that responded to me was like, well, why don't you just ask the coach and actually be a little more engaging on what the purpose behind it, because you need the content. I'm like, brother, I don't need to ask anybody. Like, you think I've never seen that? Like, it's not like I'm taking something out of context here. I know exactly what it is. I don't think it's very stimulating. And they were like, oh, whatever, agree to disagree, whatever, and I was like, fine. Well, the guy found me. I spoke at the Universal Speed Rating Speed Summit in Austin a couple weeks ago, and he was like, hey, I was the guy that you talked to on Twitter. I was like, oh, no way. Like we were in person, and we talked about it. But like, I want to make sure I come like full circle here, because I think really good practitioners can argue both sides. One, you can make an argument that dropping off an 18-inch box is not very stimulating for a college level athlete. Sure, you can. But number two, like, do you also understand that like how much forces actually come through in a depth drop, right? And then like maybe that's like an early exposure to handling forces that are really low, just to get them to build up to maybe a 48-inch depth drop, things like that, to try to land rigid, where you get 5 to 7 times body weight worth of forces in very little amounts of time, to have eccentric RFD, which is an extremely important metric for all field and core sport athletes. It's interesting, the more conversations I have with guys like Les Spellman and the force plate metrics and stuff that I see now, like if you actually correlate to the athletes you think are good at sport and look at one metric that correlates the most to just being good or longevity, it's eccentric RFD. It's interesting. Like, you got to be able to handle eccentric forces. And, we have a lot of conversations around all of this. And I'm like, that's really, really interesting, because, a lot of times in field and court sport, you actually see the ability to change direction is a massive, massive skill. Talk to Les Spellman, who talked to Ken Clark recently. Also, if you actually understand from a linear sprint standpoint from track as well, like, you strike the ground, the higher your forces or the higher the velocity, you actually do have higher braking forces that happen, because it's almost like force management.
Yeah.
So you can turn it into propulsion. Like, it's not, a lot of people think like you want to try to down regulate all braking forces. But that's not necessarily true, because you have to have some type of braking in order to use the stretch shortening cycle, period. People don't realize that. I'm like, oh, it's a really good point. So circling back to the snapdown deal, like if you actually start thinking about forces in vectors, velocity, ranges of motion, applied forces, and just learning about it from physics and biomechanics, a young kid that needs to do a snapdown with fast and unweight themselves, relax, and then contract, you start thinking of like Cal Dietz and some of the stuff that they do. And I'm like, hey, maybe this snapdown has a little bit of value and actually has early progression places. Maybe I shouldn't be so quick to completely, talk bad about it. But at the same time, what one thing can look like and the way that I just explained it there, that could be useful if being used in a progression to eventually get to more like high, fast forced exposures. If you're just using it as a one drill to work on landing mechanics, then I'm going to absolutely destroy you. Like whenever you talk about that, because I think landing mechanics are stupid. Like they don't really exist.
Oh, yeah.
Like watch sport. You land in a million different ways. You better expose tissues to a lot of different velocities, angles, vectors, to protect from those things. There's landing mechanics are really stupid, so in my opinion, especially like, when it comes to ACLs and all that stuff. But, so like, I just frame that up to where you can look at it in two different ways, where, man, that could be really silly, which I actually thought it was, but if you actually utilize it the right way, so that becomes like, that's the art. That example made me like really think like methods are many, principles are few. That it just keeps coming back to that.
Yeah. Yeah. It is the ability to look at all angles through the other person's lens, I think is really valuable. And I mean, I think from my lens of things, as you're saying that, if you wanted to talk context, yeah, if it was like week 1 and you just want to get some higher force contacts in and start accumulating that, or the couple early weeks. But what's interesting with the snap, and I would say this with, I would be curious, like, you mentioned eccentric RFD, and I'm assuming that's like that part of a standing vertical jump. I don't have force plates, so I live vicariously through those who do.
Sure. Okay. So
it would strike me. Yeah, if you want to explain that real quick.
I can. So imagine, like, I'm really happy. I've had a lot of experience with force plates now, but like, I think Hawken Dynamics does the best way of like inside their software to make this easy to understand. So like, if you're just looking at a CMJ, right, hands on hips, and then the first thing you've got to do is unweight. So you've got to make yourself lighter, right? You got to unweight yourself on the plates to drop with gravity. But at some point, you have to engage and start slowing the momentum to go the other way. Make sense? So think about the velocity in which you unweight is going to require braking forces at a certain rate to meet it, to stop it and send it the other direction before you get into any propulsion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if I'm doing a CMJ, all right, so you also have to think about unweighting the velocity, but also the counter movement displacement.
Mm-hmm.
More distance equals more velocity, but more time, right? So if you want to lower your hips longer, you better be going faster, and you have to be able to stop it faster in order to create a longer impulse whenever you propulse and get into the air. That's why like a CMJ is like such a great representation of force management globally, right? That's why it's not just about jump performance. People think it's just about jumping higher. It's not. Like when it comes to using this across the board for sports performance. Now take into effect coming from the air into like a depth drop or a drop jump or a depth jump. You're handling more velocity, and you're going to handle more force because now you've got impact coming from, rather than just unweighting your body, you're actually coming down and having to anticipate contact. So that's the brain. You have to pretense, and you're coming from a higher velocity and a higher displacement. Therefore, if you can't develop enough force at a rate, like if you can't develop force at a rate that matches that to change direction or manage it, you have two options. Like, if you don't have enough force to manage it and you try to be rigid and you can't manage that applied force, something's going to go wrong in the tissue, right? Like my favorite definition of injury comes from Jordan Shallow. He says it's applied force is greater than tissue tolerance. So that's why like you hear guys like, oh my gosh, Dan Cleather, who wrote Force, say force absorption doesn't exist, right? It's a good cue. It's not an actual thing that happens in, biomechanics and, biophysiology, that when you touch the ground and you have such forces, you have two options. You either have to try to be rigid and handle those forces to be quick off the ground, think somebody with like a really high RSI, or you have to elongate the time in which the force can handle it, which is greater impulse. You have to yield. You have to be a little bit more yielding to it. And the body will more than likely do that to keep it safe.
Yeah.
Right. So like that's a whole rabbit hole on just something that's so simple, but it's like, all right, now let's bring this back to the snapdowns. I've got somebody who needs to be able to handle that type of force, right? Maybe on bilaterally with two legs. You also need to be able to do it on one leg. Well, how do you regress that all the way down to like something you can microdose and do all the time and constantly give frequency to those things? You can do somewhat of a snap down. Let's think of a youth athlete also that needs to also, you can piggyback. I need to get into a good athletic position because I don't know how to hinge. I need to control my pelvis with balance. And then I need to be able to do that with speed. And if I can do both of those, I'm killing two birds with one stone. Now that's a really good explanation for using a snap down with a young kid, right? To be able to get into a position where you can hinge your hips, have pelvic control, and then add velocity to it. And then you add a little bit of an 18th depth drop to do it with a little more velocity and also anticipation and pretension. Because guess what you do when you sprint? You're either on the air or you're on the ground. And you have to have some type of pretension. Like the brain is anticipating ground contact, right? In order to be able to handle forces, to be able to be fast. Like, and trust me, like this is an amalgamation of all of the people I've talked to. This is just not my brain. Like this is me having constant conversations with Les Spellman and Danny Foley and Brian Kula and world-class coaches. You know, I have a systematic brain that I try to make it sound and put it in frameworks. I feel like that's what I do best is I like decode things, you know, and try to communicate it in a way that's palpable. And I'm like, I take all of that information and I'm like, well, now I'm going into training systems and I'm like, all right, I'm thinking about all that, but what about like concentric force? Because like if in early acceleration, you have to have that, right? You have to have some type of concentric capability or propulsive capability too, right? Like in the weight room, you've got to have everybody measures strength with concentric movement, not eccentric movement, right? That's why, like, to me, like one of your questions you sent me was like, what are your thoughts on assessment? Right. And I'm like, we've gone from these dinosaur days of just like bench squat deadlift, how much can you lift? You know, from like barbell performance, global performance in a lift that requires a certain skill set and certain people with certain limbs and levers can do better at. But like if you stand on a force plate, like I can take 3 measurements with like propulsive power, braking power, and MRSI and learn a lot about what you can do. You know what I'm saying? And how you express it. Bobby Stroop says this, strength is not an attribute, it's an expression.
Yeah.
I believe that 100%. Like a strength can be evaluated based off the task. It's being observed. Like strength is an observation, right? It's not really something you have because it all depends on the task, which gets really philosophical, but all of that brings me back to like, well, what helps an athlete get better at the game? Yeah. What keeps them healthy? And then how can I move the needle on them being able to express their skill sets inside that system where they're interacting with physics while they're playing the game? You know, and then one thing that I don't have the most control over is techniques and tactics inside the sport. That's the sport coach's job, right? So I went on a huge like roundabout there, but it's like where my thoughts are currently at. And I know all you asked me was to kind of cover the eccentric RFD part, but
yeah,
that's kind of where my head's at of what we're seeing and how we're training kids now and how understanding that force exists whether or not you hold a barbell or not. Like it does, you know?
Yeah, the highest forces are definitely, or at least the most rapid are those without, especially with like the lower legs, foot, and all that. And the thing, you know, as you're talking about the force plate, something I would love to see someone do. So if someone wants to do this, please like try it and send me the data. But like, so just talking forces, because I do agree, like the actual mechanics, especially for an advanced athlete, and in my opinion, even for a young athlete, I would maybe need to do a little more experimentation with that on the young athlete side. But like, someone made a joke, one of those joke videos, like everyone landing in a snap down in sport, like volleyball, jump, spike it, land in a snap down, you know.
Yeah, that's silly.
The closest I think happens is sometimes you get a rebound. Like basketball and track were my big high school sports. I mean, I say big, really track. Basketball is more an expression for me than actual mastery, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But it was like you get a rebound and you pull it down and you kind of like, you're not throwing your arms back, but there's kind of like there's this mind snapping down, but it's a very trapping, like it's almost like a trapping bracing type thing if you do it and you really feel it.
Sure.
And my thought would be if somebody like I grew up in terms of like, I guess, doing strength and conditioning on your own. I bought a book for this, but it was a depth jump book. It was when I was 16. And it's like literally one of the best old books. It's funny to think a book written in 1999 is an old book, but I guess it is. But the program literally it was almost all just depth jumps for vertical jumping and a little bit of bounding. And the first phase was like a few depth landings and then maybe a depth jump off a low box. It just went from there. Eventually it was like single leg depth landings and depth jumps. I was depth jumping off of 36-inch boxes in my backyard that my dad made. And when I was like 16 or 17, and it was like, there was a tree out there. So I like pulled the boxes over a tree. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll use the tree as a target. Like almost like throwing little things. Hey, I got to gamify this. I got to get a target to jump to, and I mean, my vertical exploded doing that stuff, and that's the epitome to me of eccentric RFD. How much
There you go.
better does it get than that? As long as you can handle it. I was narrow ISA elastic. Like me and depth jumps were like meant to be. Like,
That's right. See, and I was the opposite. I'm about as wide gets, completely concentric oriented, like, big, like if I was a pitcher, right? And I remember having a guy on my team in college, his name was Aaron, and who was very narrow ISA. He was 165 pounds, but had an electric arm, like just unbelievable with just like the way he could create elastic energy and threw harder than me. But I was like the big, strong guy who was heavy but was very much a muscular mover, rather than an elastic mover. But yeah, so but there's, you got to go with how you're built, and the strategies that you have and do what you can. But yeah, I mean, none of this stuff I'm talking about is new.
Yeah.
It's all, I mean, you all go back to Jay Schroeder and these folks have been doing this forever. Like this, we're just repackaging it. We got new tools and more available cool technology to be able to kind of put it into metrics and stuff. Also, I want to say this out loud too. Like a lot of old heads, when they hear me talking about this and stuff, they're like, oh, what's old is new again. You act like you're being so novel. I'm like, no, I'm not. But understand that taking what once was and changing perspective and trying to implement it in the new age, that is good. That there's nobody trying to take credit as if we invented we've founded eccentric RFD because we have force plates that are available now and not $25,000 in a lab. It's not that coaches were doing that 25 years ago. Of course they were, great. Of course they were. That's amazing. We have to keep compounding on history, that those are good things. I can't stand it when somebody's trying to shoot somebody down just because, oh, well, we did that in 85.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. There also was a lot of bad stuff done, bad train. People talk about good music in the 80s, which I do believe I will stand by this as the best music is 70s, 80s, and 90s. Yeah, I'm just so firm on that. But I think the same creativity that forged a lot of good training. But there's also a lot of bad music, and there's a lot of bad movies and all that. And so it's but I think that even without force plates, I think a lot of coaches back then would have just figured out, okay, if we can do this kind of depth jump and landing, that leads to being a good athlete. And this is where I wanted to come along with the snapdown, though, because having grown up on depth jumps and feeling depth jumps out and also making mistakes with depth jumps and hurdle hops and everything you can imagine, a snapdown feels a lot different than a depth jump or even a landing a way Jay Schrader would program it. A Jay Schrader or InnoSport landing would be very just stiff. You just hit the ground, it's just bam. You're not dampening it by swinging the arms back. It's just a hit. And I mean, I would imagine that RFD spike's going to be as high as you can pretty much possibly get it. Mm-hmm. So, I think if you jumped on the plates and you had Jay Schrader, one of his classics, and I don't think you see this too much in any of the material. It wasn't in Freaka Training, but it's called drop legs, where you're standing like the Karate Kid and one leg is up in the air and then you hop and you bring the other leg up. So you're in a tuck jump, but now you're 18 or whatever extra inches off the ground. And then you're coming down and you hit and freeze as soon as you can. And to me, that would be, if you want to just talk forces, that's the thing.
Oh, yeah.
So it versus if I snap down, am I actually dampening so much that that's almost an over dampening if you really keep doing that versus.
If you're looking at it as a force application stimulus, because a lot of times a snap down isn't that, if that's the problem I have, is that if you think it's a force application stimulus, and it's actually not. If you're using a snap down to help a kid have some motor learning, to learn how to get into an athletic position and hinge their hips with velocity, it's not about stimulus. It's about it's a body awareness. It's movement literacy. That's good explanation, right? That's good use for somebody who's young. But if somebody's already acquired that skill, why are we doing it? That was my shtick with the thing I saw of D1 college football players. If that's the reason why you're using it and claiming athletic position or drop landings or, hey, we always take our freshmen through block 0. I'm like, dude, why in the world, are you just spending time in non-stimulating activity? Because if that's what that is, they've already acquired that skill. It's the same thing that I see Sean Mishka and a lot of other people who are Movement Miyagi. I don't know if you've ever seen his stuff. Yeah. So why are NFL running backs still doing the same stupid bag drills?
Yeah.
in individuals.
Yeah.
Like, are we really just we're lazy, or you're saying, well, it's just a warm up. I'm like, so you can't warm up better? I would much like with these high end athletes, you only have so much output you're allowed to use before they have to recover because they're so elite. Like every single piece of energy needs to be completely calculated and you need to be able to manage your budget, right? Manage your energy budget because it costs a lot with these elite athletes. Well, how do you put those together that move the needle? Rather than just being like, well, this is what football do. This is what we do in football. We go around bags. That shit just pisses me off because I'm like, dude, you get paid $500,000 to do that dumb shit. I'm like, whatever, man.
Yeah. I love how the stimulating piece, because I think if athletic performance curriculums were rewritten, I actually think block one or somewhere in very early education should be stimulus. And stimulus is hand in hand with motor learning and environment, the performer environment. And I think motor learning makes those terms like kind of dry sometimes and because it almost has to be academic. But that is just the thing is a lot of coaches talk about, you do hear this. I've heard it, like Adam Nelson was a good example. I heard Chad Wesley Smith talking about how like Adam Nelson just used to crush in the weight room, like 5 sets of 10 or 8 sets of 10 and just way overboard. And it was way too much, but he still threw like a monster. And I think the idea was something to the tune of, well, he believed in what he was doing and he perceived it to be really helpful. And it's like, and it was obviously very stimulating for him. Now,
right.
And I just think that a lot of times people will, and I'm very much on board with this, is how we perceive and are stimulated by our training is going to be very equivalent with the results. So it's like,
holy cow,
reasons in the world to, okay, we got to get in this position for a snap down, but if it's not stimulating, then what's the actual adaptation that's happening? And honestly, even forces, like if you could somehow have a field of force plates and just did cuts on the field, you just doing some even easy stuff, just some easy 2v2 or whatever. I would imagine a lot of the forces you're going to be getting and picking up through the body are probably similar, if not exceeding that kind of force. So I just think about those types of ideas from a stimulation. But as you were talking, Cody, I got this thought of, okay, what is something similar like dynamic hinge? Because I'm like, okay, weight room want to teach hinges. What's a way to now make this dynamic? Because you want to be able to own it, right? You want to be able to use that pressure, and it's more meaningful. But what about like a forward underhand medicine ball throw, backward overhead medicine ball throw? You're kind of doing the snap down thing, but now it's actually because you're loading up to throw a ball really far, which is much more stimulating and exciting than, hey, coach said to land in this position.
Right. I mean, movement efficiency is everything to be able to, express any type of movement skill. And then the way you challenge it is with velocity.
Yeah.
You challenge it with speed, but then you also challenge it with a variety of option where you have to make a decision, right? Where it's something that it's very stimulating from making a decision rather than being predetermined, open chain versus closed chain. And that's why, do you guys realize the best athletes in the world do these movements at velocity? There's what sport, field and court sport, not lifting sports, does it not require and demand doing these things at velocity?
Yeah.
Force is mass times acceleration, and they're equal. Mass isn't squared. They're the same value, right? So, and it's what kills me is why are we so caught up on the things that move so slow?
Yeah.
Still, across everywhere, college football and all these things. And I understand that you got to have hypertrophic effects you got to build mass to be able to survive in a contact sport. So you have to be able to be stimulating in those ways, which make all the sense in the world, But at the end of the day, this is one of my favorite things always when I do velocity-based training presentations, whether it was at the CSCCA or I do it for Vitruve, because Vitruve's, I think, is the best VBT product in the world. And I say, barbell athletes use power or dynamic effort to increase their total. They only do power work that helps them be a better force producer in unlimited amounts of time within the constraint of what they're trying to achieve. Field and court sports should literally be the opposite. You should only stimulate with heavy really heavy, slow-moving stimulus if it helps drive your power output and the expression of it. Don't keep chasing that strength stimulus if it's not helping that.
Mhm.
And the only way to get, because eventually it comes down to, like you mentioned, Bondarchuk and transference. If you want to be able to be more powerful, you have to do the thing that at the velocity and the specificity of the velocity in order to do it. Like, you have to do that when you move more down the chain. Now, when you're really young and the low hanging fruit is to just get some general strength, that's going to be amazing. Like, you should see our youth program. Like, we run 3 12 blocks of training of moving slow, because they got to have motor control before anything.
Mm.
Right. So of course those are not bad things, but understanding the context of, like, dude, I'm still seeing all these really high level athletes that have been developed in Division I college football or even in the pros. And, like, you got strength coaches that are still just hanging their hat on a trap bar deadlift or hanging their hat on a heavy squat. And I'm like, I don't get that. I'm sorry. Like, and maybe I'm not, I don't deserve to coach at that level. I don't have any desire to coach at that level, actually, but I hate the whole power dynamics of team sport and strength conditioning. It just drives me nuts outside of high school. But yeah, like, that's, if you actually look at sport, how do you come to that conclusion? And I'm always trying to ask people, like for example, Brian Kula, my partner. He's a world-class human, world-class coach. He's very much I've done this for 30 years. I rely on my experience. I rely on my eyes. And I like to ask why. Explain why that works. And he gets frustrated sometimes. And it's like, man, I've seen it work. And I'm like, I want to know why the system works. I'm like, dude, I'm the guy that wants to know, why does my computer on my car say check engine light? Why does it say that? And Kula's like, who cares? You need to go get your engine checked. Like, and he's not wrong, because we're very much yin and yang, and we're such an unbelievable pair in that way. Because sometimes I get paralyzed by thinking too much instead of making a decision. That's a negative from the way I think. So yeah, it all comes back to, like, I'm going to poke holes in everything, because my philosophy is, if I try to shoot bullets through a method or a concept or an approach, and it holds up to it, I actually may have something.
Yeah.
But you never know until you shoot at it. But some coaches are scared to death to shoot at it because they don't want to feel like their approach is not effective.
Yeah. I think we're similar with the car light. I'll see mine pop on if it's like near one of those quarters, like if it's 125,000 miles or something, if it's one of those quarter ways, I'm like, oh, it's probably just one of those checkups. I'm sure, like, I don't know. I'm always like, is this really coming on for this reason? And I'm not that good at cars, to be honest, but I'm the same way. So yeah, one thing I was actually just thinking, this just popped in my head, and let's get into velocity-based training and all that, because I do think, yeah, there's that study, right, that said that most college football players, I think they obviously get way stronger, but they don't really get that much faster a lot of times. Like,
yeah.
And so, yeah, like, what are you managing there? But I was even thinking too, with, like, the whole, like, stimulation, right? Like, making it stimulating and high velocity. Like, one of my favorite movements, and it's just funny because it just depends if I have the equipment available sometimes, but, like, one of my favorite all-time plyometric movements is a depth drop, like off 18 or so inches, 24, with a medicine ball to a granny is such a sad, like, for the explosivity of that movement.
Yeah.
A Viking throw, like a forwards, deep hingy squat, explosive, like,
that's hilarious.
If someone, it's like there's certain, like, curtsy squat that needs to be called something else. Granny throw needs to be called something else. But depth drop to granny, you have to have that hinge, dynamic loaded hinge. But it's not just hit this position because coach said, it's no, I'm going to try to throw this ball as high as I can. And if you have, like, a ball you could measure, even better, or I like to have, like, things like when I throw in my yard, I have a tree and I'm like, all right, I'm going to get it to this branch or something. That's like the hardest thing I think that we can, I guess if it's forward, back, or, forward underhand, that's easy. It's how far do you throw, or backwards overhead. It's vertical is a little bit, tough sometimes, but
that's right. Yep.
That's the but I was like, yeah, that would be a cool little piece there. Anyways, enough of that. Let's talk about VBT, because this is, I framed this question up for you, and to me this is the interesting thing. I really want to get your opinion on this. And, like, so velocity based training, I know when when I first got my the job, my work at Cal, which is 2012, I came from a school we didn't even have a prayer of getting VBT Tendo units in the gym, way too expensive. And so finally, I have access to these. And a lot of talk at the time was, okay, well, if you're doing all the sprints and jumps and throws, then why not just keep the lifting general and just lift weights and then get your measurement out of that? And so, but you talked about a little bit with the beginners. I know, certainly, the motor control there, but tell me how you see that whole equation unfolding over time. And yeah, I totally your opinion there. Big question.
Wheels are turning. Yeah, it's good because I feel like it's actually a philosophical issue.
Yeah.
You don't understand what VBT is if you think that if you do sprints, jumps, and throws, you don't need it. Let me explain why. Velocity is a metric. Velocity is also meaning people think velocity. Okay, if I hear velocity, that means faster must be better. Speed, throwing a ball, racing a car. So therefore, that's going to mean that the only training I do means with high speed, so I never lift heavy. That is literally the thought process of kind of why VBT is I wish there was a better way to name it. You just talked about names being important. I actually think the same thing. Velocity is just another metric that gives context to what's happening. And it's real-time feedback rather than percentage-based training where you're already operating off of old information, right? It may be pretty close, but you're operating off of old information. And then at the same time, how do you gamify training without some type of feedback other than coach saying, great job, or make the plates clank? Because that's all I got, And that's a great cue for a coach that doesn't have much. I want to hear them things go ching,
yeah.
At the top, the metal plates.
Yeah, there's something cool about that. Honestly.
Yeah, right? I love that because that's trying to drive intent. So understand that when you have a number, because we know that load, right, is inversely correlated with speed. Great. So now we can match velocities to the type of stimulus we're looking for on top of trying to gamify the training in order to amplify the stimulus of the training that already existed. So if I get an athlete that I know that, hey, I'm trying to operate, say we're trying to lift heavy, right? We're trying to stay below 0.5 meters per second, which to me is a strength stimulus. Well, how do I get an athlete to lift the heaviest weight possible at the fastest rate possible with the appropriate stimulus that I want, with the appropriate volume that I want?
Mm-hmm.
That's the name of the game. You know what I'd love to do? Get it outside of coach's judgment and let it be a number on a screen. And now I'm actually here to cheer you on. I've got these constraints, and that's what I did with my high school kids. We went full-blown VB2 for the last 3 years I was there. I was like, listen, they're like, Coach, how much weight can you lift? I'm like, or how much can I put more weight on? I'm like, I don't know. What's the rules say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? We built a system. I want you to lift the absolute heaviest weight possible that you absolutely can within rules A, B, and C. Right? You can only lift this many reps. You have to lift it with this type of technique. So you have to execute it at a certain level, which can be both from sequencing, joint position, and displacement, which is range of motion. And then also you have to hit it at this minimum velocity. And if you exceed X velocity, you can go up this amount of weight, and then you do your next set. And it became this auto-regulatory thing, but also very competitive.
Yeah.
Right. So now you've got an athlete that's incentivized to want to drive the living crap out of the bar. That's way more stimulating. Right. Remember, mass and velocity. You need both mass and acceleration, really, for force. And if you drive the acceleration portion of that formula, it's going to be more force. Right. So now we're going to get more stimulating. So even if you're lifting heavy, it doesn't matter if we're lifting really heavy or if we're lifting fast. It's just another way to, one, get the stimulus to be accurate. And number two, incentivize the athlete to compete and make them engaged in training. There's no better tool on the planet that does it better than VBT, because every single coach will tell you that the weight room is useful. Don't think that lifting weights isn't useful. Every athlete needs to lift weights in some form or fashion, whether it's tissue health and local tissue prep, and we need to put on some size. We need to be able to increase our general force capabilities. But if we can enhance those things with a little bit of competition, but also auto-regulatory to get really nailed down with the stimulus, and then create a systemic effect, a system around that, and how athletes can feel free because they're like, oh, I've stepped into this very neat system that's easy to understand, and there's no more guessing. And all I can do is just like, I'm trying to make that number go up and do it the right way. And I'm going to get after it. And now I can talk crap to my rack mate who I'm lifting more with. And even it's relative, right? Like everybody's moving a certain percentage of their capability, but the velocity number is the same. So we're only comparing velocities. We're not comparing weight, even if somebody's a strong kid or if they're not. Because like 1RMs are only going to reward the strong kids.
Yeah.
What about your narrow ISA kids who actually don't do very well with compressive forces?
Yeah.
They're not going to be good lifters. Basketball players are not going to express these big 1RM numbers, but they're going to jump and touch 11 feet and dunk on your head. You can't call them weak, you know? Like it's all of these different things that come back to VBT that now I'm like, man, I don't like once I have it, I'll never go back. No, that doesn't mean to say that I wasn't a GA strength coach in Livingston, Alabama, which nobody knows where that's at, and had at the University of West Alabama where we had rusty barbells and rusty plates in a dungeon training, and I had to find a way to get results. Yeah. Like you have to be able to do that. I'm not saying that it's ride or die without this technology, but why in the world would you not want to utilize it if you had it at your disposal?
Yeah. So follow-up question to that, because I'll take an argument that existed that was floating around that would go with that. And I'm not saying I have a...
I welcome those. Please bring it.
I have my biases here and my thoughts, but I'll just totally leave it and just open-end it for you here. But the thought was that, okay, if you're lifting, jumping, and sprinting and being explosive outside of the weight room, then would adding a velocity, a competition in the weight room as well, because you're competing outside the weight room and hopefully in the sprints, jumps, throws, and it's ranked, recorded, and published or whatever to some extent, then is also doing that in the weight room, adding extra intensification that may not be needed, especially for, let's say, a high-level athlete. So
Good point. Yeah.
Here, but tell me your thought on that.
That's actually a really good point. I'm glad you said that. So interesting. Because you always have to keep in mind the psyche of the athlete, right? For example, we trained 6 or 7 NFL guys this summer. And I learned very quickly that sometimes you have to take away numbers from those athletes. Here's why. One, they're ultra competitive, which can create this ultra intensification, which may be too much for them. Second, they're not going to be able to keep climbing the ladder because they're tapped out, like they're on the elite side of their outputs. And it's not all with elite athletes. It's not always about increasing your outputs. That's what people don't understand. A lot of times you have to clean up the signal of the input and then manage, right, with elite athletes. So I take that away because guess what? They're not going to PR. Like they might not PR for a year.
Yeah.
Kula tells me he was training Christian. Like there was rarely a time that he could use any feedback mechanisms. Like he wouldn't even hardly time his sprints that often because he was so damn competitive and would just lose his mind if he wouldn't like hit a certain number. And like, that's not good for him. Right? That's not good. Like they need to feel good. They need to believe in what they're doing. They need to be able to move efficiently. And sometimes it's good to just take that away. That's a really good point. Now you've got like this understanding of how like it's not always applicable in every single situation. It's 100% true. And that's with any tool we have. I'm glad you said that because that's something I experienced for the first time this summer and realized like, I used to think that feedback was everything to drive stim. But guess what my most experience was with? An amateur, underdeveloped youth athlete where that's true. First time getting my hands on NFL athletes and elite pros that Kula has had more experience than I've been alive with. I learned very quickly, like, I see why he didn't utilize some of these tools with some of these players. That's the art of coaching. Those are very, very valuable lesson for me. So I'm glad you said that because that's a very strong caveat.
Yeah. And I can see, especially, I think some of that was maybe just elite, higher level athletes in general. I think high level track athletes is a big one there.
Yes.
Is it worth it? But then again, you get like Su Bing-chan and the Kaiser jumper. But I think the Kaiser jumper is a little more specific than a bar because it's a shade closer to actually accelerating, sprinting, jumping.
Sure.
Than what you get with a bar. I mean, it's not.
I'm with you on that.
I wouldn't say it's like horribly different, but it's definitely closer. And I've found that to be the same with track athletes. And that we had those at Cal. They were great. And it was almost one of those things where too, the jumps coach or the decathlon coach loved the Kaiser jumpers. And I had never seen one. And I just kind of look at it is this just another fancy trinket? I'm just used to bare minimum. Like I had my dad built me a slant Polish box to use with
Oh,
my
yeah.
athletes. Like it was that like kind of bare bones. Like we had that, and
Sure.
it was just yeah, like the plate clink type idea versus anything else. And so I'm coming from just pure Spartan and a little skeptical of any tech that would push me up above and beyond. But then I very quickly was like, yeah, this Kaiser jumper is awesome. Like we're going to use this a lot. But that's intensely gamified. But one of the things
100%.
I did, and I think this is important as well, is like you said, the judgment cycle. I think about this is if you have enough, if everything in the program has a number, that's a judgment cycle for every single thing in the program. Because if you didn't get the thing, you're going to be pissed off.
That's right.
And there is something about just doing it for the sake of doing it, the task, the stimulus, the game. And then you think about, well, how much do you assign and how much don't you? I always try to set up with the Kaisers that I wanted to bring them in. Like usually it was bi-weekly, or I tried to cycle them in with the weights so that at the end of every cycle, I was relatively confident athletes were going to get the most they ever did.
Sure.
And I would actually cover up the Kaiser numbers if we were getting close to peaking or the national championships. I would put paper over it because I was like, I don't want you to look at that number.
Yeah.
Because if you see something you don't like and it's 2 weeks before nationals,
Great
you're
point.
going to get pissed off. And so, or you're going to doubt, we don't want any seeds of doubt in this process. And yeah, so it is that balance, isn't it? And so
Yeah.
do you think that, really, would you say more for like intermediate and high school athletes who may not be super stimulated? Like, where does it shine the most for you? If you're like, hey, this population, this setting, this is my jam. Like, this is where it's, or anything in light of that last thing with elite, or it's like anything but elite. Beginners need to work on control. Where does that shine the most for you with your groups?
9th through 12th graders. Definitely, like without a doubt. Like that's you're 14 to 18 years old, even like your young college athletes as well. Because at the end of the day, like if a kid still needs to put on strength or mass for like a football player who's going to college and playing in a new level of physicality, and they need to use compound lifts that are very stimulating, like you use VBT to dial that in, right? Especially if you're like, all right, let's continue to try to get relatively, some more mass on you so you can handle those things. But it greatly shines when the kids are in like early training ages, like what you gotta get into puberty a little bit so you have some ability to handle some of those forces. But it's not, I actually use it with our youth too. That's what people think, that it's not for youth. It actually can be. I love to use it as a governor, meaning that like, and you can pair things like Poliquin style tempo training with young kids for motor control. And then on the way up, they have to hit a minimum velocity to make sure they're not using something too heavy that's too stimulating. You actually want to, and it's not about like increasing weight if they hit a threshold. It's just a governor. Like don't go below 0.6 meters per second, because I know that that's quality and not too stimulating. And we can like go very slowly with progressions and learning movement patterns with that style. Like I have like 3 levels of VBT, like just feedback, a governor, and then targets. Like that's the system. With how things go. And with the youth, the governor works really well to teach them, I can move a little faster. And also like, if I start to get grindy, that's immediate no, the young kids. And it'll reflect that with the right speed governor. So, but it mostly shines in our high school group, that's for sure.
Sure. It's funny, before this conversation, I would have thought like VBT and youth and been like over intensification, like my instant like bias, right? Like comes up. But, as you say that, it makes sense, especially if I'm a younger athlete and, you want to, I also think of it like having a joy for something as a baseline and also learning something on a deeper level as a baseline, like those two things. Like it's going to be more of an enjoyable experience for a young
Sure.
athlete in so many ways. If it's like, there's a number, this is fun. And it also is higher velocity too, like versus, hey, just you're 13 years old and just, hey, we got a 1 rep max test, and it's like a real hardcore level type thing versus it's a little more high velocity and fun and it fits where you're at.
Well, how are you pro max velocity numbers and miles per hour numbers and record, rank, and publish, but anti VBT? That's a complete oxymoron.
Yeah. I think the only reason people would be is just that if you really are polarizing, like you're just you're totally separating out. And I think the ultimate polarity would be all the rank record publish, all the plyos, and then the other end, it's almost like Jay Schrader's extreme ISOs. That's the
Yeah.
polarity because it is super boring,
Yeah.
super difficult, very internalized. It is not fun. And all those kids who already didn't like lifting, they tell them, hey, lifting class. I know you were thinking squats, 3 sets of 10 squats, which some of you already weren't looking forward to, but today we're just going to do a 5-minute ISO lunch.
Yeah, let's do a 5-minute ISO lunch hold.
Down there.
Yeah, it's going to hate your life.
That's the ultimate polarity. But I will say, after doing that, the 3 sets of 10 squats without a tendo probably seems more exciting for the kid that doesn't like lifting, I suppose. But yeah, sorry, I'm kind of rabbit trailing. But I do think I like thought experiments, and
Exactly.
I like thinking about, if all you had was this, okay, that's, and then how much in the middle do we need? And I think, yeah, to me, the stimulus value just seems like it's so fascinating piece of that. And then I know you do like a lot of like boards in the gym. Tell me a little bit about that, because I could also see like either high school or younger kids, if there's some sort of group gamification that really causing a lot of life to flow through the session with that. Tell me how you put that together.
Always. I mean, it goes all the way back to like when I got that job at the high school level and wanted to just make kids excited about training. Leaderboards have been around forever, but then like trying to find a way to where I'm not entering data 3 hours a day and making things systematic and diving into learning the powers of spreadsheets and multiple formulas and algorithms and things and learning really quickly. And then, in this day and age, you have AI that can speed up that a ton.
Crazy.
So but then having also the funds to be able to have an AMS like Rock Daisy, right? That's what I use. We use here. And I use a combination of creating my own things in a spreadsheet, but also like doing most of our mass data collection inside of an AMS that handles and visualizes data easy. And I can easily sort from a date range that I want, the type of metric that I want, whether it's average or best. I can sort it how I want, and I can filter the group how I want. So at the end of the day, if we're running sprints, we're running, fly 10s. We're going to put our leaderboard up so everybody can see who they're competing with. And then they can, the great part about like that is like, I'm very specific with the information, because you don't just want to reward the fast kid, because if the fast kid may always be the fast kid, they need to be incentivized to try to be a more fast kid. And then you got the slow kids that may always be slow, but how do you incentivize them to be a better version of themselves?
Yeah.
You need all of it, right? So it's like, hey, we're competing with each other, but also competing for ourselves, and we're also cheering for each other all at the same time. And the way that works is when you look at the information, and that's why Rock Daisy really came into play here, was that one, you can see progression of like your best rep every week. It'll highlight green if you're above your average in that date range. It'll flag if it's a PR. And then you have two metrics. You have your overall best ever PR, and then you also have your average. Like what is your average fly 10 over the last 30 days? That's what we like to use. And then we'll sort it by best. But at the end of the day, I tell our athletes, like, look, we're always shooting for a PR. PRing every session is not realistic. That's not training. You have to train through dips. But you should always compete like crazy to try to beat your average, because if you continuously beat your average, you're going to get better. So you're competing with you. Now look at the person right ahead of you. Maybe you can get a little bit faster and jump that person on the leaderboard. So now it's a combination of intrinsic motivation and also community and group and team and environment, and trying to create an electric environment to motivate them to go a little bit harder. Because if you have the music blasting and you got chills and your stimulus is going to be more stimulating to run fast, right? It's the whole like Tony Holler's gauntlet deal, right? You're running through a tunnel. It's more stimulating. So at the end of the day, I want to run faster. That's why he's like, why in the world would you not wear spikes, get on a really fast track and run as fast as you can? It's almost like overspeed for football players. Like, yeah, it's really smart, right? It's trying to find a way to enhance stimulus without taking drugs, which is immoral in some ways. So it just comes down to that, like that's what the board's there for. And I always try to be careful, because I'm always mindful of my incentives. Like, that's a whole topic I can talk about, Joel, is like incentives and being very careful with what you're measuring and what your targets are. Like, one of my favorite like philosophical laws is Goodhart's law. Have you heard of Goodhart's law? So, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure, right? When you start to, because if you don't, and I don't think coaches do this on purpose. Like that's not, I don't blame the coach, but you have to be very aware of this, where if you think that somebody has given you a target you must hit. For example, I had a very well-renowned NFL strength coach from back in the day. I'm not going to say his name, but like his head coach back then was like, I need to see all their squat maxes need to be higher by the end of the pre-test, post-test.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what you say, you're incentivized to optimize the environment to make sure that target gets hit.
Yep.
No matter if it's actually a true adaptation or not. Meaning that all of a sudden when it comes test time and it's post-test time, when it comes to a squat depth that is whether it counts or not, or was it the same as the first test, you're going to be incentivized to be a little more lenient so you can keep your job.
100%.
That to me means the incentives of performance are in the wrong place. That's not good. That's bad management. That's bad evaluation. That's poor, right? Like, so I'm always trying to keep in mind what I'm either promoting something or I'm not. Like, no matter what, like, everybody says like, what you tolerate is what you promote in coaching. Always be careful of what you're promoting and what you're tolerating and what you're letting slide and what you're incentivizing. And make sure that like the whole picture of as long as the incentives are in the right place, you always look for win-win situations. Same thing in business. If I'm working with a staffer, right? How do we build our ecosystem or our environment to where you're incentivized for something and I'm incentivized and we're in alignment? Now we're going to be lethal if the incentives are in the right place, right? So same thing in training. If it comes to a leaderboard, like that's why I went down these rabbit holes of trying to find metrics that worked for everybody. When I was at my high school, I had a really small turf strip, about 30 yards long and about 3 yards wide. I could only do like fly 10, 5-yard build, 10-yard fly. It became very popular and I did like 20,000 data points while I was there because that's all I could do. It's literally all I could do. And I was like, well, my fast kids are all the ones that are ever going to see themselves on the leaderboard. Well, that came into like, well, what's momentum? Right? The whole momentum metric, right? All right, let's add in body weight. Ooh, the heavier kids can see like, or a kid that's small that needed to put on weight for football and their fly 10 time may have came down a little and they feel like they did something wrong when they were incentivized to add a little bit of weight on them to be a better football player. But, they saw that just, they held some of their speed and they added mass. So their momentum, their truck stick or whatever went up. Yeah. Oh, good. That's a good thing. I can keep lifting heavy even though my speed's not going up as far as possible. So now I'm not incentive to, if I just lose a bunch of weight, I'll be faster, but I'm actually going to be a worse football player. Yeah. Wrong incentives, right? Yeah. It's all mental models to me, So like I try to be very cognizant, whether it's a leaderboard, whether it's VBT, whether it's quarterly reports, whether it's signs we have on the wall, the language we use, how we cue things, how we interact with our kids. I'm always trying to teach me and my staff and keep these things in mind of like, keep in mind what you're incentivizing because it's a constant battle. Like it's hard to keep it on track at all times. You're flying a plane and you got to constantly redirect. That means you got to have systems in place to be able to continue to check your trajectories. Cause like the airplane analogy, you get off by 2 degrees, you're going to miss the city by 100 miles, so like, it's the same thing. Like a really good shipman that's driving a boat, or a sailor knows how to work with the wind to get to their destination, and it's constant redirection. It's not a perfect science. Like it's not like you can just set a program in motion. Here's our 12-week program and go and expect it to go as planned. Like no, you're not a skilled coach if you can't find ways to keep your boat, on the right destination. So,
yeah, I like that. It's almost like the adaptation, or you're almost like redirecting Goodhart's law, at least to the best outcome possible versus, hey, when are at max. Because I remember my first full-time job coaching, it was at a D3 school, Wilmington College, and the people in charge of the weights for the football team was like GAs, like for the most part. I worked with them like one semester at one point, but usually just like the assistant coach of the GAs or whatever. And I just remember watching them max out one day while the track team was in there, and I'm kind of like looking over my shoulder at the football. A few football guys come in, they got to get their squat max. Some guy goes halfway down and comes up, and I see the GA checking it off. Oh, good, and nodding his head, yes, good squat. And I'm just thinking, of course he's going to say that guy did that squat, because if he's in charge, he better be, this guy better be lifting more. But you can't cheat a 10 fly like that. You
No, you
can't.
can't.
And on top of
Unless you take 3 steps back behind the line.
yeah, there's
Hey, this is a 15-yard fly, not a 10. Like I'm gonna get a little bit. I'm gonna get my first 2 steps chance to, because I found that with my kids. So like, because like I had to, a lot of times it was a one man show, and like we did a 5-10 fly, and we had like, this is where you start. Your foot must be on the line, right at it, and you'd have kids walk around the corner and like kind of walk into it and take off, and all of a sudden their speed would be higher, and they're like, I got faster. I'm like, no, like you started from a greater distance, so you had more room, you had more runway to add more velocity. We're comparing apples to oranges here, and had to be strict about that, right? So like, you either have to have the staffing and manpower to make sure that that's right, or teach your kids about integrity and making sure that like, if you actually want to see if you got better, you need to try to repeat the test. In performance, we're not. That's another thing too. Like freaking PhDs, that's not real science. You can't control every variable. You're not in a lab. You can't do this and that. I'm like, I'm sorry, but most of us practitioners are 10 years ahead of you. Like you're really important. Don't get it twisted. You can actually validate because you can control the variables, but in the field, it doesn't work that way. But you have to get as close as possible. Like, you know what I'm saying? You can't just let it fly in the wind, because you'll always be comparing apples to oranges. And I know I've seen so many coaches just leverage. You can twist and turn a number however you want to make it look the way you want it to look. And that's dangerous,
Yeah, 100%. And that's where I think there's almost its own art of gamifying and rewarding the things that matter the most. I know just one experience I had, it was like a whiteboard session that just turned into this with a performance coach, Ty Leash. He's down in Tennessee now, but he was at the gym that we were at, EvoFit, over here in Cincinnati. He was working with a local football team, and we were just talking like weekly training flow and stuff. And then it kind of turned into, I think I had just done a podcast with Tony, and the idea of truck stick was on there, like the momentum plus mass. And I was thinking about Tony's bands and all just the reward of feeling like you have a band, and how it fits with ritual and a tribe as well, and status. And there's a lot of things that go beyond just, hey, do these sets and reps, and we're going to hit these volumes. There's that intrinsic motivation that drives. And we came up with basically, it was like it was a scoring system, like a mini decathlon based on standing broad jump, 40-yard dash, and then bench press, because that's, it's football. But like, you can't cheat it like you can a squat as much. So, and that was a really positive, like the kids responded really, really positively to that, Ty had mentioned as he ran them through the program. And so I was like, that's kind of cool. Like, from track, I love the idea of decathlons or training pentathlons. In the off season, you come up with a quadrathon, you get a score and stuff. And I think that's kind of like the off season. It's like the sport off season for track, is you take the 4 things and put a score on it or whatnot. But I know when we did it, when I was in college, it was like we never really tested it so much. We didn't train it. Like we just tested it every 6 weeks or something.
There you go.
But I kind of wish we would have done a little more on like some of the sprint stuff, because that was my acceleration. I mean, I was a good high jumper, but my acceleration and concentric power was just oof. Like my F0 or whatever, first step would have been just probably pretty weak. So I wish that there was a little bit more of that for the sake of that test. But yeah, that's something that's intriguing to me, is like, how do we gamify like pieces, KPIs that are as close to what we need out of sport as possible, or intermediaries, and try to find that. Yeah, and then the screen too. I would have loved to have a screen for that quadrathon, showing up. I probably would have done better for sure, just to know that whatever jump or whatever we did was showing up.
That segues into this, Joel. Like, a lot of coaches hate the screen because they think it's a distraction, and they're not wrong. And a lot of coaches hate tech because it just slows down the training pace, right? Like I always say, tech comes with a price. Like,
yeah, that's a question for you.
Yeah, and price isn't the money, even though it does come with a price tag, but it comes with a price of learning curve, implementation into your program. And is the juice worth the squeeze? Are you willing to put in the work to make it to where eventually it does feel natural, to get there? Like when I first implemented VBT with our high school, I did it with 4 racks to test it. And then we implemented it wholesale, but that there was resistance that came with that from coaches, from kids. But once we committed to it and got through the hiccups and got through the learning curves, it got way better. So like, you have to understand that there's no piece of tech that's errorless. There's no piece of tech that doesn't have its faults too. Like there's no such thing as a perfect product, but there's a lot of tech out there that's absolutely worth having if you'll learn how to use it. And are you willing to commit to doing that and spending some time doing that? So um
Yeah. Balance for you, because tell me about like, just to close this out. Tell me a little bit about that balance. In my mind, I almost see it as, I like quadrants has been the mental model I've been on, just different way to put things into quadrants, and maybe even just more of a poll. It's like if you have tech and screens, that's very external and stimulating. And I think about Tony's Gauntlet 40. I think they only did it twice a year because it's just so damn stimulating. Like what if you every day is a gauntlet? It'd be like every day you're turning the that scene from like Back to the Future where he like plugs in the guitar and just like blows out the speakers. If anyone's old enough to remember that, it's like how many days in a row are you going to do that? Versus, and it's like on the other side of the quadrant. Well, if you have on one end you have stimulating and external. Well, the other end's kind of like coordination, awareness, and internal, or just doing things for the intrinsic value of doing the thing. And that's just where my mind goes with trying to quadrant things out.
I think that's excellent. Yeah, because I think it comes back to like the Dan John deprivation thing too. Like you have to cycle it in and out. Like the same thing with us. Like we'll do 4 weeks without VBT because it's gotten stale. You have to we want kids will ask for like the best thing in the world is like, for example, we get to a deload week or whatever, and we're getting ready to do a quarterly test, and the kids are like, "Are we running lasers today?" And I'm like, "Nope, we're not. We're just gonna do build-ups."
Yeah.
No lasers. And they're like, "Oh man." I'm like, "Yeah, good. You're gonna be looking forward to it next time."
Yep.
So there's absolutely a balance there where sometimes like, you know what? Screw the VBT. We're doing 5 sets of 5 at this percentage of our historical data, and I want you to focus on just the quality of movement you're doing. Not an external number, just like feel your body. Like all really good points, Joel. I mean, like that's a very much, I'm such a believer in tech, and I try to help coaches understand how to use it, and that there's a price to it, but it's also very useful. But I'm also like, my number one commitment is to not lose the human element.
Yeah.
That's like my big mission, right? Is to how do we, I don't know, modernize the approach to training without losing the human element.
Yeah.
Like that's where I'm at. I don't want it to turn into this robotic experience. That's crazy. Like it'll never be effective. Like you have to have a human element. I think that's why coaches won't ever be replaced. At least good coaches won't be replaced by AI. Really crappy program writers will be though. That's for sure. So yeah, I mean, you're right. There's a time and place to take it away. And I feel like if you do that in good rhythms, and try to make it to where it's a little bit unpredictable, so the kids it can be more, a little bit more deprivation. Therefore, when you come back, it's a little more stimulating.
Yeah.
It's basic, adaptation syndrome. Like it's basic understanding of physiology. So, all good things.
Yeah, I love that. You mentioned AI. I think a whole nother hour podcast plus would be the thought experiment of when AI is going to program your program, it's going to optimize your program, it's going to get the tech readouts and optimize it. And where in that is the human element and the art of coaching, because it is. And honestly, it'll just be, there's a lot of, different ways you could go, but I'm a strong believer that without that human piece, you could optimize the hell out of a program with AI and you still would not get the best results. In fact, I look at the Diego Maradonas and the Pete Maraviches and Herschel Walker or racing the train, doing sit-ups or whatever. Like there's just something that you can never get away from there.
I'm trying to read a book. It's really dense right now. I need to pull it up on my phone. I'm listening to it. It makes it really hard because I've always wanted to understand the biology and science behind belief.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a book I'm reading right now. Let me find it. It's called The Biology of Belief by Dr. Bruce Lipton.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm trying to work through it and I'm struggling, but like I want to understand because I just 100% believe like that's why placebo effects are real. Like the power of the brain and actual belief of like truly believing in something working is a very big part of the stimulation. And having another human believing in you and empowering you and bringing you to a level you've never felt before, which is art of coaching and capturing. Brian Kula calls it capturing kids' hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't replace that. Like, that's the next piece. That's and maybe AI really helps the very intrinsically motivated athlete that may be very self-sustaining. That's a kind of an anomaly. But most kids need to have their greatness brought out of them for them to believe in themselves in the first place. So like AI can't do that. Like they're just not going to be able to. So I'm actually trying to extract the science and the neurochemistry behind it by trying to read a book that I have no business reading. I'm trying to, but I want to understand it. That's why I'm like I'm the son of an engineer. That's what I tell everybody. I'm like I probably would have done, would have been really solid with being an engineer, whether like, because that's just kind of like the way I think. I probably would have had a really good career doing that. And my dad is a lot like that. And I always try to understand the way things work, man, and always chasing that. So,
yeah, I'm the son of an engineer as well. My brother's an engineer, but I just like games a little bit too much.
Hey, I'm with you.
Attention span,
100%.
Related attention span, I think just, wasn't in the cards. So, hey, I love the thought experiments, and Cody, thank you so much for taking the time for this. I know a lot of people are aware of your social media and all that stuff, but just for further reference, where people can learn more about you, and then the new facility that you're at sounds awesome. So anything
Sure.
you want in there?
Yeah, I'd love to. If you can find me on Instagram, CLH_strength. I'm at the same handle on Twitter. You go to my website, clhstrength.com. I'm trying to be a lot better of putting some resources on there. I've got products and stuff on there you can buy as well, like a lot of spreadsheet products that I own, like, if you need a programming card and things like that, I've helped coaches with spreadsheet products, and also have a lot of free like ebooks on there, in-season training for multi-sport athletes, program manuals, programming toolkits, stuff like that. That's on there that you can get, some for free, some for purchase. You can look at there as well. But where I'm at now, I'm in right outside Nashville, Tennessee. It's called the Farm and Forge Club, which is going to be a very unique academy/community club that's all about high performance, and also have an education side to it that's going to kind of be trying to make into a one-of-one situation. We're here in the early grounds, literally hired here before the site's ever built. And the more you pay attention on social media and stuff, you'll be able to see kind of how we're building this thing, both from our personal Instagrams, me and Brian Kula, or if you want to go follow it on Instagram, go to the Farm and Forge Club on Instagram. You can find more there. So, Joel, I can't thank you enough, man. This podcast it's been a mainstay in performance. The fact that your discipline and commitment to doing this over how many episodes now? I mean, holy cow, dude. Like, it's like I ran a podcast. I tried to ran 2 of them. I fizzled out at episode 65 and then and then changed jobs at episode 23 with the second one, and was like, dude, I was exhausted and couldn't commit to that. And the fact that you're doing this and helps so many coaches, I want to make sure that you understand that we are very thankful that you decided to do this, because I think you've helped hundreds of thousands, man. Thank you very much.
Hey, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Cody. And I'm glad I could make it this long and we could have this conversation today. It's really a blessing. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you.